I recently had a conversation with a friend about the erosion of privacy due to government and corporate surveillance, and he asked me, how did we get to this point? I thought that was a great question, so I decided to make a video to answer the question. Earlier this week, I posted a question on YouTube asking, in what decade did the United States government begin wiretapping to secretly collect information? Thank you to the over 1,300 people who participated in that poll. The correct answer is the 1860s. 40 years before the vacuum tube was invented, Union soldiers were wiretapping telegraph lines in the South to intercept Confederate messages during the Civil War. That is where it all started, and in this video we will examine how electronic surveillance has evolved and metastasized over the past 160 years. I am Dr. John Padfield, an engineer turned state representative turned business professor, and this is Business Reform, where we discuss issues at the intersection of business, technology, and society. Let's fast forward to 1924, when a Seattle police officer by the name of Roy Olmstead was suspected of smuggling alcohol from Canada into Seattle during Prohibition. The U.S. Bureau of Prohibition wiretapped his phone line and gathered evidence that led to his arrest and conviction. However, the U.S. Bureau of Prohibition did not bother to get a warrant before they listened in on his telephone conversations. The Fourth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution guarantees the right of the people to be secure in their, quote, persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures unless a warrant is issued based upon probable cause. The U.S. Bureau of Prohibition argued that because they did not enter his home, they did not need a warrant to tap the wires coming out of his home. This issue was appealed all the way to the United States Supreme Court, who in 1928, by a 5-4 decision, ruled that wiretapping private conversations did not violate the Fourth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. One of those 4 dissenting justices in that case was Louis Brandeis, and I made a whole video about him last year that I will include in a playlist at the end of this video. Justice Brandeis wrote a scathing dissenting opinion in the Olmstead case, and I want to share 3 short excerpts from that opinion he wrote almost 100 years ago in 1928. Subtler and more far-reaching means of invading privacy have become available to the government. Discovery and invention have made it possible for the government, by means far more effective than stretching upon the rack, to obtain disclosure in court of what is whispered in the closet. The progress of science in furnishing the government with means of espionage is not likely to stop with wiretapping. Ways may someday be developed by which the government, without removing papers from secret drawers, can reproduce them in court, and by which it will be enabled to expose to a jury the most intimate occurrences of the home. Experience should teach us to be most on guard to protect our liberty when the government's purposes are beneficent. Men born to freedom are naturally alert to repel invasion of their liberty by evil-minded rulers. The greatest dangers to liberty lurk in the insidious encroachment by men of zeal, well-meaning but without understanding. Let me read that last sentence one more time. The greatest dangers to liberty lurk in the insidious encroachment by men of zeal, well-meaning but without understanding. The dissenting opinion of Justice Brandeis helped overturn this horrible ruling 39 years later in the 1967 case of Katz v. United States, in which the Supreme Court ruled the Fourth Amendment protects people, not places, and that wiretaps do require a warrant. Jumping ahead to the 1930s, Congress passed the Communications Act of 1934. Section 605 of that law reads, quote, no person not being authorized by the sender shall intercept any communication and divulge or publish the existence, contents, substance, purport, effect, or meaning of such intercepted communication. Notice there was no exception in that law for federal agencies such as the FBI. In 1937, in the case of Nardone v. United States, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that wiretaps conducted by the FBI without a warrant violate Section 605, and that any evidence derived from an illegal wiretap is inadmissible in court. In 1952, the National Security Agency was secretly created by a classified memorandum written by President Truman. It was established to centralize signals intelligence and code breaking, focusing on foreign threats but laying the groundwork for domestic surveillance. The NSA was sometimes referred to as no such agency because its existence was not broadly acknowledged until the 1970s. Glenn Greenwald, one of 3 journalists Edward Snowden trusted, met with, and leaked classified NSA documents to in 2013, said, quote, "I say this without the slightest bit of hyperbole or melodrama. It's not metaphorical and it's not figurative. It is literally true that the goal of the NSA and its Five Eyes partners in the English-speaking world, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and especially the UK, is to eliminate privacy globally, to ensure that there could be no human communications that occur electronically that evade their surveillance net. They want to make sure that all forms of human communication by telephone or by internet and all online activities are collected, monitored, stored, and analyzed by that agency and their allies. That means to describe that is to describe a ubiquitous surveillance state. You don't need hyperbole to make that claim, and you do not need to believe me when I say that's their goal. Document after document within the archive that Edward Snowden provided us declare that to be their goal. They are obsessed with searching out any small little premise of the planet where some form of communications might take place without them being able to invade it. Last year I made a whole video called Glenn Greenwald on Privacy that I have included in a playlist at the end of this video. In the 1960s, the FBI was running a covert, often illegal operation named Counterintelligence Program, sometimes shortened to COINTELPRO. This program used illegal wiretaps to spy on, discredit, and neutralize prominent people including Muhammad Ali, John Lennon, and Dr. Martin Luther King. However, since anything the FBI learned from an illegal wiretap was inadmissible in court, the FBI used what they learned about Dr. King's personal life in an attempt to blackmail him into taking his own life. As always, links to all my sources can be found in the description of this video. I go into a lot more detail on this topic in my video entitled 62 Years of FBI Scandals in 18 Minutes, which I have included in the playlist at the end of this video. While we are still in the 1960s, let's take a quick look at another type of electronic surveillance developed and deployed to monitor enemy troop movements during the Vietnam War. These are seismic sensors which were dropped in a line from helicopters at night flying over the jungles of Vietnam. These sensors would bury themselves in the ground to detect footsteps of enemy soldiers, and the twig-looking part that remained above ground was an antenna that would send a signal to a plane flying a few miles away whenever troop movements were detected. While this surveillance technology did not impact constitutional rights of Americans, I wanted to mention it because it is an interesting but little-known part of electronic surveillance history. The surveillance abuses by the FBI, CIA, and NSA in the 1960s led to the 1975 creation of the U.S. Senate Select Committee to study governmental operations with respect to intelligence agencies. The committee was chaired by Senator Frank Church of Idaho and was commonly called the Church Committee. It was tasked with investigating illegal surveillance, covert operations, and civil liberties violations committed by the FBI, CIA, NSA, and other federal agencies. In 1975, Senator Frank Church stated, quote, "The National Security Agency's capability at any time could be turned around on the American people, and no American would have any privacy left. If a dictator ever took over, the NSA could enable it to impose total tyranny, and there would be no way to fight back." The 1980s brought us the Electronic Communications Privacy Act of 1986, which was a significant privacy improvement for Americans, for a little while at least. Government agencies quickly found loopholes, such as the law only covered the contents of an email, not the metadata of the email like the sender, recipients, time it was sent, and the length of the email. This law also lacked protection for emerging technology such as mobile phones and cloud computing, so it was quickly outdated. The 1990s brought us the Communications Assistance for Law Enforcement Act of 1994. This law was intended to ensure law enforcement agencies had the means of wiretapping digital communications by requiring all telecom companies such as AT&T and Verizon to build wiretap capabilities into their networks. This created a built-in surveillance infrastructure that would be easy to abuse in the future and increase the risk of data breaches because of the mandatory backdoors that could be exploited. The year 2000 arrived, but the hope of a new millennium was instantly shattered one morning in September 2001. But as the old adage goes, never let a crisis go to waste, and those in power didn't waste any time in taking advantage of this tragedy to cram Orwellian legislation through Congress while the country was still scared and in mourning. I made a whole video on the Patriot Act that I have included in the playlist at the end of this video, but here is really all you need to know for right now. The USA Patriot Act was a 342-page long bill that had a flesh reading ease score of 72.3. That simply means it is very difficult to read, so difficult in fact that only 4.5% of adults in the United States are even capable of reading and understanding it. And even for the 4.5% of Americans capable of reading this legislation, they can only read it at a rate of about 150 words per minute, which means it would take over 6 uninterrupted hours to read it and much longer to think through what that legislation would do to America as we knew it on September 10, 2001. The USA Patriot Act was introduced in the House, passed by the Senate, and eagerly signed into law by President Bush in just 72 hours. Please let me know in the comments section how many members of the House and Senate you believe read the bill before voting on it. In addition to the passage of the Patriot Act, the early 2000s also saw Google gain a virtual monopoly on internet searches and Facebook gain a near monopoly on social media. I have made videos on what former Google CEO Eric Schmidt has said about your right to privacy and about an unethical experiment Facebook performed on their user without their user's knowledge or consent, and I have included both of those videos in the playlist at the end of this video. Another step along the growth of electronic surveillance occurred in 2004 when the CIA's venture capital arm, In-Q-Tel, invested millions of our tax dollars into a startup data analytics software company called Palantir. I will be making a video on Palantir in August or September of this year. Then the 2010s brought us the Snowden leaks, including the NSA's PRISM program, where they leveraged big tech for mass surveillance on millions of innocent Americans without a warrant. In the words of Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon, quote, "When the American people find out how their government has secretly interpreted the Patriot Act, they will be stunned, and they will be angry." Last year I made a whole video on Senator Wyden, and I have included it in the playlist at the end of this video. The 2010s also gave us the birth of the term surveillance capitalism. The concept of surveillance capitalism, where you are the product, has been around much longer than the 2010s, but it grew exponentially during the 2010s and inspired a Harvard business professor to write a book about how it is undermining not only individual autonomy, but the entire concept of democracy. In the 2020s, we are constantly subjected to the ubiquitous collection of our personal data by corporations. I have included my video on General Motors being sued by the state of Texas over data collection, and my video on Ford's new patent to monitor in-vehicle conversations in the playlist at the end of this video. The 2020s have also seen explosive growth in the surveillance industry, and I have included my videos about flock safety and ClearForce in the playlist at the end of this video. And that, my friends, is how we got to where we are today. There was no grand conspiracy, just millions of individual decisions made over the past 160 years by elected and appointed government officials and agents, or by senior executives of private companies. They were born in different centuries and came from different backgrounds, but what the vast majority of them have in common is they are men of zeal, well-meaning, but without understanding. Those are my thoughts, but I would love to hear yours. Do you agree with my summary, or do you think I missed some key events or coordinated planning by secretive organizations? I can't wait to read your comments. And finally, just a couple of quick announcements. I have dates and locations for the first 4 stops of my 2025 Brushfires of Freedom tour. Go to brushfirestour.com for more information on these free events. And be sure to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss my upcoming videos on how you can enhance your personal privacy. Thank you for watching.